there has been a nuclear accident in the Soviet Union, and the Soviets have admitted that it happened.
Children were given iodine. The Russians went ahead with May Day celebration.
35 years ago, at 1:23 am Moscow Standard Time, on Saturday, the 26th April 1986, the worst nuclear disaster in the history of mankind occurred at the reactor number 4 in the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant near the city of Pripyat in northern Ukraine, Soviet Socialist Republic in the Soviet Union. The tragedy occurred during a safety test at 1:23 am after the AZ-5 button was pushed. Around 8 seconds later, the reactor 4 exploded.
Hi guys, after the massive explosion occurred, the central Chernobyl question was, why did the emergency shutdown blow up the reactor? All that is coming up right now.
At the time of the disaster, Ukraine was one of the 15 Soviet republics. Chernobyl was in the northern of Ukraine near the Belarusian border. The centerpiece of these power stations was the RMBK reactor. The reactor was a graphite reactor which had been powering the Soviet growth since 1970. At the time of the explosion, the RMBK reactor was 2.5 years of age. Here we have the main systems of the reactor, which produces a large quantity of heat. To collect the heat, pumps circulate water vertically upwards through the reactor. Steam is collected separately in tanks. The steam spins the turbines of the generator which power the electrical grid. The steam is cooled back into the water from a large tank and fed back into the main circuit, and the cycle repeats. It then runs like this with full power for months. Here are the buildings required to accommodate these systems. So how did the components fit inside the buildings? The components were located inside individual concrete compartments. The concrete vault around the reactor was 2.5 meters thick. The reactor was inside a steel drum. The central component was graphite. The central core of the RMBK reactor contained huge amount of graphite, which was essential for the reaction. When the atom splits, neutrons are ejected at near the speed of light. These neutrons go too fast to split the surrounding uranium. Neutrons slow down as they bounce inside the graphite until they travel slowly enough to split more and more atoms. Graphite is termed as the moderator because it moderates the neutron speed. Each graphite rod block has a hole down the center which contains the pipes for the fuel channel, and water flows inside these rods at really high pressure. The uranium is formed into these small pellets. Each fuel pellet is extremely fuel dense and contains the heat energy equal to a truckload of coal. The control rod set power level by means of acting as an on and off switch. These are made of boron, which is a very powerful neutron absorber. When the rods are in the core, they kill the reaction. With around 80% of the rods withdrawn from the core, the reaction runs at full speed. When the rods were extracted, they left a space behind. The lower half of the control rods were made of graphite, which filled this void. Exchanging boron with graphite was a sound design principle. The reactor was more efficient and it made the control rods twice effective.
You guys must be wondering why the explosion occurred.
It was a result of a design error called the Tuft effect, causing a momentarily power spike precisely when the control rods were supposed to kill reactivity. The graphite displaces did not extend all the way down to the floor of the reactor. The lowest 1.25 meters was cut short to equalize fuel burns as there was lack of space below. The base of the reactor was the place where everything went to a mess.
Let us look at the test carried out in reactor number 4 and come back to the cause of the explosion.
The objective of the test was to stimulate loss of grid power and verify if the flywheel effect of the turbines could power the water pumps until the diesel generators powered up. The previous attempts of the test had already failed. The test needed to be performed during a reactor shutdown, but on this day the shutdown was paused at 50% for most of the day.
There were two crucial contributors for the disaster. 1. The reactor being neutron poisoned. 2. The test was carried out by less experienced night shift who were not properly briefed, and the chief engineer was also an arrogant person.
At 1 am, the shutdown began but was paused because the electrical grid needed additional power and Chernobyl Unit 4 had to make up the shortfall. After a 19-hour pause, the shutdown was permitted to continue. The new shift took over at midnight and put the reactor onto auto control to keep it steady at 22% power. The footages here are of the Chernobyl mini TV series published by HBO in 2019. However, the auto mode was not designed for a poisoned core. The power dropped down to 1% before the test had been done. At half power, the reactor became poisoned with xenon gas, which is a powerful neutron poison. A basic reactor rule is not to restart a reactor which has been poisoned because it is unstable. Xenon forms 6 hours later and interferes with the fine equilibrium of the nuclear reaction. The chief engineer in charge, Anatoly Dyatlov, was under pressure to do the test. He made the fateful decision to extract almost every control rod to bring the reactor back up to enough power to do the test. This is like a car applying more than full throttle to control a jammed handbrake. 1 hour after the reactor stalled, the controllers had raised the power back to 6%. The test was performed at 1:23 am and it lasted for 40 seconds. The control staff had already agreed beforehand. Upon completion of the test, the AZ-5 button was to be pushed for complete shutdown. The control staff reported all was calm by this time. The historic AZ-5 button was pushed by Leonard Toptinov. The control rods were in this configuration when AZ-5 was pushed. Only one was fully inserted. At no time the core should have less than the equivalent of 25 rods active. But on this tragic evening, it had almost none because of the misguided attempt to counterbalance the xenon poison. The reactor had been pushed too far. The AZ-5 inserted all the top control rods simultaneously, but unfortunately the lower control rods were not coupled with the button. If it moved, the disaster could have been avoided. The reactor 4 was reaching the brink, and the top defect was the final result. Water is a weak neutron poison. As graphite displaced the water, a temporary power surge formed across the flow of the reactor. The boron would arrive too late. The rapid jump in power caused steam bubbles. What less water meant was less neutron poison, more heat, and more reaction. This was the feedback loop to destruction. There was nothing stopping the reactivity runaway. The base of the reactor was overwhelmed and the fuel channel vaporized, and a small explosion was heard in the control room. Reactor pressure was lost and coolant water flashed to steam, increasing reactivity across the core. Reactor 4 in that moment was providing energy of much of the Soviet electrical grid. The reactor power was estimated 20 times the maximum. We will never know because there was nothing left to do the measuring. The reactor drum and the building structure couldn't hold all that sudden energy release. The explosion blew the 2,000-ton reactor lid through the roof and it landed back in the reactor pit on its side. The north face of the building fell away in the explosion and exposed steam tanks and main pumps. Firemen spoke of warming their hands over the graphite lying all around the ground. They were unaware that they were exposing themselves to lethal dose of radiation.
The Chernobyl explosion was a heat and gas explosion, not an atomic bomb.
Here we have the control room after 35 years, and its equipment is reused elsewhere or removed as souvenirs. Soviet nuclear scientists were aware of the top defect even before. There had been previous channel ruptures from AZ-5 top defect in Leningrad in 1975 and in Ignalina in 1983.
Even beforehand, changes were recommended for the RMBK reactor, but it was said that the RMBK reactor could not explode. No changes were made, thereby the explosion occurred. The AZ-5 button was the hidden detonator in this destruction. We will never know what exactly happened inside the control room that day. But for sure, we know that there were people who sacrificed themselves to control the disaster situation. Us humans are the reason for the construction and destruction of anything that happens around us. So guys, that is about the RMBK reactor or the Chernobyl explosion. Hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Have a nice day.